Welcome back to God Talk here on Cambridge Community Access Television. My name is Michael Mack. Guess who's on my right?
Oh, it's me.
And on your left?
Oh, it's me.
Michael Koran, good friend, fellow seeker, God Talk traveler. Each week at this time we get together and we talk about God behind his back or to his face.
Oh my.
Talk about God, talk about faith, talk about being. And what were we talking about just a moment ago before the camera started rolling? We were talking about, before we were talking about ceremony, pomp, and circumstance.
Yes.
We went to a little church in North Cambridge. What?
It was a little church in the basement in North Cambridge we went once.
East Cambridge.
East Cambridge.
East Cambridge.
Sorry.
This was Sacred Heart Church.
Yes.
In East Cambridge on 6th Street, and it was, there must have been like 15 people in the entire mass, and it was just, it was a tiny room. It was like a little cellar room. If you remember the cellar that the Beatles played in,
Yes.
back in Liverpool, it had that same kind of feel. It's sort of like underground, little cavernous, and tiny. But very intimate and very beautiful and reminiscent of what it might have been like back in the very, very early days of the Christian tradition.
Oh, when they just met in...
When they met in people's homes, in catacombs, when things got dangerous. That would... I can understand the appeal that many people feel in going back to those very early days. The way that the Protestant tradition came to us, one of the reasons for the Protestant tradition coming was the feeling among some that the Catholic Church had gotten too big, too unwieldy, too filled with ceremony, pomp and circumstance, and not enough of like the real deal.
Yep.
And so the Protestants wanted to strip it away,
And go back.
get down to the scriptures, get down to the cross. That's all you need. And there's a place for both. There's definitely a place for both. You know what's interesting and kind of fascinating, you might have heard this from our dear Professor Bart Ehrman, that in the early days of Christian history, when there were just tiny groups of people meeting in people's homes, and reenacting the Last Supper, where Jesus said, "This bread is my body, this wine is my blood." Rumors started circulating among Romans, among pagans, that they were cannibals, that they were actually going into people's homes and eating somebody and drinking blood. And so that was one of the reasons why Christians were, let's say, underappreciated and were threatening to people because, whenever rumors start, even in our own day, in our own time, if you hear something about somebody that lives in your building, if somebody whispers to you, "Hey, you know about so-and-so? He was caught doing and I don't know what it might be, but he was caught doing something," and you don't have any facts at all. All you have is what this neighbor whispers in your ear. This neighbor like Iago whispering into the ear of, help me, Shakespeare. Iago whispering, Othello, whispering that your wife, the beautiful Desdemona, has been making eyes at so-and-so. So just hearing this, suddenly all of this arises in your mind, and it's easy to begin to believe that these things that you're overhearing, this hearsay, is real.
Oh, one of the painful moments in Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, which is
one of the greatest novels of all time, right?
A very spiritual novel about Jesus and a Jesus-like character named Alyosha.
Mm-hmm.
And Alyosha's girlfriend, who was a tough woman, asked him, "Alyosha, is it true that the Jews drink little Christian babies' blood?"
Mm-hmm.
And Alyosha said, "I don't know." which is painful. He didn't say no. I mean, it's a novel.
And it's true in a way, in that he hasn't been to every service.
Right.
And so if he were speaking strictly philosophically and theoretically, he would have to say no. However, if he were aware of the kind of trouble that that could bring and has brought,
Yeah.
the kinds of scurrilous stories that have been told about all underrepresented people,
Killing.
that's how things like pogroms get started,
Yeah.
and holocausts and purges and
I would prefer him to say, there's no proof I've ever seen that that is true. None. It's a
or I
rumor.
cannot believe that that is true.
And I've known Jews, and they're not like that at all. I don't think that ever happened. But it's interesting, it's very connected to the Christians being accused, as you were saying, of, eating bodies and drinking their blood.
And there's the reverse too. I mean, really what we're talking about now is storytelling. So what we have heard is the evil side, the negative side of the way that stories can be implanted into one person's consciousness and then spread. But the reverse is true as well. That beautiful stories, good stories can be told. And that's what the Christian story has been for many people.
Oh, yes.
The story that God came from heaven down into earth to take on the flesh and blood of a human being and feel exactly what it's like to be a human being, and to feel exactly what it's like to suffer and to die as all human beings do, but not only to suffer and die, but to rise again. And through his rising, we all can rise.
And as you said about
What a beautiful story.
you show the birth pangs, and to know that this is often not easy. This is like giving birth.
Life is not easy.
And sometimes
it's
suffering.
easy.
Yeah, sometimes it's easy. But not to expect it always to be easy.
Uh,
That could make it harder. Actually, M. Scott Peck said that. When we know life is going to be difficult, it makes it a little bit easier.
Well, wasn't that one of the first great truths that the Buddha brought to us?
Yes, Buddha said the same.
That life is suffering, or something like that.
Yes.
And I think that both Buddhism and Christianity are direct responses to the question or problem of suffering.
Yeah.
Okay, here we are, and hurting often.
And it's so, I don't do this well. So I get impatient when I'm suffering. But one teacher said, when you're in that kind of suffering pain, just accept the fact that it might last forever. And that was a little freeing, rather than rushing it to be over. Right? It has to have its own season, its own timing.
Because the opposite could also be true, and I have an experience from my own life, which is like a couple of weeks ago. I was just getting out of the car, I stood up, and my knee suddenly I had this shooting pain in my knee. And I didn't know what it was. All I was doing was standing up. It wasn't like I did some kind of sports feat to deserve this. And so I felt pretty sure that it was some kind of meniscus tear or something like that. You know, as we get older, the soft tissues of our body are less resilient than they used to be. And for a couple of days, it's like I was going up and down stairs like one step at a time. I was limping around. It's like when I stooped over, I would feel the pain. It was really, I was going to that place of, oh God, what if this is it? What if this lasts forever?
Yeah.
And I got on the phone with a friend of mine, and I was complaining about this, and he said the same thing about soft tissues, you know, that they're resilient, but people, he said, are walking around with meniscus tears all the time. And that they come and then they sort of like work themselves out, and the tissues like move back into their pocket or whatever. And he said that he himself, you know, he's got a meniscus tear. And there was something about that conversation Because that very day, and in fact within the hour, my knee felt better. And it felt miraculous to me that by hearing this hopeful message that he had given to me, I just felt it was like a miracle cure.
Wow.
He was sort of like my Jesus at the time. It's like he came in and with his words laid his hands on my knee.
Wow.
And just having my good friend give me this hopeful message, it made all the difference.
Well, he gave both. He said sometimes people walk around with it for a long time. Right? He gave both messages.
No.
Why,
I must have, then
I thought he said that sometimes people get used to it and it heals itself. And
Yeah.
sometimes people keep walking around with it for many, you know.
But what he was saying was that they're not walking around with pain. That they have the meniscal tear.
Oh, I didn't understand that.
They have the meniscal
but
tear.
They're able to walk around without.
But it's like, there are people walking around right now with cancer who don't know it and will never know it because the body will marshal its resources, eat the cancer, and it's only in an autopsy that a clinician will be able to say, oh, that guy had cancer.
Wow, miracle stories. We're well. Columbia, we're well. Christine, we're well. Don't believe what they tell you.
Well, I guess my takeaway is surround yourself with positive people, that might help. Or surround yourself with negative people, that might help.
I unfortunately had a couple of cancers.
Mm-hmm.
And my
one here,
yep, and one down
in regions
in my center of my body.
Right. Nether regions.
And my inner voice kept telling me, you're fine, you're fine.
For years.
Yeah, but fortunately I went to doctors and I wasn't fine. And they did radiation and now I think I'm fine.
Well, in terms of the cancer that was right there,
yeah.
Your doctor said, I believe you used the word cured, didn't he?
No, he wouldn't use that actually, that would have been...
But he used a very final sounding...
Dormant, he said.
No, that's not what he said. At least from what you told me.
Yes.
What he said to you is that it was...
I think he was careful to use dormant. Maybe I wasn't careful.
Maybe you weren't careful. Maybe you were saying what you wanted him to say. I don't know. But that would be the wise thing and the prudent thing and the professional thing for him to say, dormant.
Yeah.
From what you told me though,
Because
it's like it's gone.
No, he still wants, no, it's still there, a scar tissue. Big. But I don't want to lose the theme.
What's the theme?
Sometimes.
What's the theme?
That wonderful story that your friend told us, how miraculously healed.
Yeah, miraculous healing. Is that the theme of this?
Perhaps, yes. Or how a story can help.
That's the theme, storytelling.
And how that can be healing.
It can be It can both be healing and it can be diseasing.
Right, I was going to the diseasing part. Although my inner voice told me I'm well, I did listen to it for 7 years actually. Then I was lucky enough to get checked. And they said if you had waited another year, you would have been in big trouble. So what do we make of that? As far as the story I was telling myself, a very little story. Maybe just words.
Well, you could think of it as there was a miraculous transformation that happened inside of your mind that allowed you to move from this perhaps dogmatic idea about how your healing, the look and feel of what your healing was going to be, versus the one that actually brought you the healing, which was modern medicine and technology.
Right, and that's the story. Sometimes your inner voice can be cheering you up. You've heard the old little mantra. I was feeling really bad and I heard a voice. Cheer up, things could get worse. And sure enough,
they did.
Sure enough, things got worse. So that's what happened. But that's a story too. And that helped me. to know that just because my inner voice tells me I'm well, it might be a good idea to check it out with some medical experts, which I did. So that's a happy story, actually.
I carried around for years this idea about what I would do if I ever got cancer, because I had seen a documentary about an artist I can't remember anything about this artist except that she was a woman maybe in her 50s or so, and she had been diagnosed with cancer, and so what she did was to go on a lemon juice fast for like 40 days, and
It worked.
And it worked.
Yeah.
And it worked. And I thought to myself, well, that's what I'm going to do if I ever get cancer. I'm just going to go on the lemon juice fast. But you know, I'm not quite so dogmatic about that anymore. And in
Yeah.
fact, your example is one of the reasons why.
But you can do both. You can go in the fast and while checking things out with doctors. 40 days is not a long time to wait usually with
Right.
cancers.
Right. Yeah.
So all these stories, I hope they're healing. So sometimes the story needs to have a larger, means surrounded with another story. So it's not just the story, I cheered up.
Speaking of surrounded by another story, I just heard this very interesting proposition or model for the soul. And I heard it from two sources, both in the same book, however. One of those sources being the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And what they're talking about is the nature of the soul. And what they were saying was that the soul, there's an inside of the soul and an outside of the soul. And the outside of the soul is a kind of sheath. And in our life now, in the life that you and I are living right now, we are experiencing most directly this outer soul, this sheath, which is the soul that is interacting with the world most directly. When we die, that sheath around the soul dies also. However, the inner soul continues to live on and lives on throughout eternity. And it is this outer sheath that somehow transmits or acts as intermediary for or interface for the lessons that we have to learn in this outer life. And these essential lessons are transmitted through the outer sheath into the inner soul.
Yum.
And so our personality, our our outer self falls away. But there is a part of us. There is that universal part of us. There is that God part of us, that made in the image and likeness of God part of us that continues on.
Love it. I love it.
So,
like a butterfly coming out of a cocoon, maybe.
yeah, again and again and again and again. Yeah. So you heard it here first, maybe. Notice the green behind us. We haven't mentioned the green room yet.
Oh, in this show.
It's a little late, but what the heck. We now have a new concept for this show, for the two shows that Michael and I do together, and it's called the green room concept, because so often before we come on to do our shows, we've just had these wonderful conversations in the green room here in the back of the studio. And we thought to ourselves, what if we could harness that green room energy and bring it onto the studio, and instead of having this tightly scripted, tightly wound show that we've had in the past, or at least tried to have
Or try to perform.
Yeah.
We didn't want to perform for you.
We wanted to stop performing.
We wanted to be more real.
We wanted to be real. We wanted to tell the truth.
And feel better with each other.
Oh yeah, and I think it works. So the green room motif, the green room that you see behind us, that's the indicator that
this is the green room.
we're in the green room now.
which is appropriate for spring, to say the least.
No kidding. No kidding. And for recycling. Oh wait, is that right?
We're keeping the planet green. I think that
Okay.
green is a code word for things like
And recycling is a code word for transmigration of souls, the infinite reincarnation,
Right.
recycling.
So my inner, I think that story you told is the story of my life.
Which one?
The
Which story did I
soul.
tell?
The outer soul
Oh,
and the inner
yeah,
soul.
yeah.
I discovered in my life I love to read, for better and worse. That had been a form of hiding. But I read words and maybe I felt feelings. But I never felt that the people I was reading about were real.
Mm.
George Washington's a real guy.
Mm.
Abraham.
And did that change?
I eventually learning to dance
Mm.
and having a long relationship with my young significant other. Eventually I was able to feel my body, and that my body was okay. And then started realizing that all of these people, whether it's Jesus or Socrates, they're living, walking people with bodies. And I didn't know that.
Hmm. And what is the significance of that? What does that mean
I
to
mean,
you?
well, they're not just ideas.
Yeah.
When I'm reading, even here, how can I put it another way? If I'm reading even the stories my students are writing, I can read the words, or I can feel like I'm there.
But they are also ideas.
Also, yes,
Yeah,
but not only.
correct. Yeah. I shouldn't even say correct. I say, yeah,
the
it makes sense to me.
famous mantra from the Buddhists, the finger pointing at the moon. I said it hundreds of times before I got it. The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
Right.
Or a Herman Melville, the map is not the territory.
Right.
But I'd say this,
It's all about metaphor.
and my outer soul would know it, but my inner soul would not know that truth. And I was deceived by thinking, just because I knew the words, that I knew it.
Well, this brings up a topic that we could spend at least an entire show on, and the whole idea of metaphor. And we started talking at the very beginning of this show about storytelling, and storytelling is really all about metaphor. Storytelling is about taking, if we're even nonfiction, it's about taking an event and drawing from that event what seemed to the storyteller to be the salient points in order to make the point that they ultimately want to make. But it's not true in that a story cannot possibly capture every nuance, every event, even though James Joyce in Ulysses, for example, tries to capture every moment in an entire day in Dublin in, what was it?
1904, June
Okay.
16th.
But yeah, even that most brave attempt was a metaphor for the real deal. And what we're trying to find out here on God Talk is the real deal. And we don't know what it is yet. That's why we keep seeking. We're seekers. And maybe you are too. And until we find that what we're seeking, we're going to keep looking.
And even when we find it, we'll keep looking.
Well said.
Yeah.